I'm going to give a quick 10-minute intro to the subject that we're going to talk about tonight. And I'll admit, I have a bit of a slant. Some of you know that I actually spent time in both state government and federal government. So I'm always thinking about technology and security, not only from what we're doing in the private sector, but what is the government doing back to us? And that isn't always a good thing, by the way. So as we go through, I will point that out. And this is not my slide deck, but this is. So this is our topic. And I want to say that I am embarrassed for many of us in the technology community that we are in 2017 and we're still building unsecure software and unsecure devices. I understand why. I understand that it's a challenge to do this in many cases, but to be faced with the same kinds of problems, the same kind of very basic fundamental security problems in 2017 that we were in 1997 is a little bit embarrassing to me as a technologist. And this is part of the problem. Complexity is the enemy of security. And this is, some of you may recognize this as, I forget who put this together, but this was the companies that participated in RSA last year. There's like 800 companies represented on here. Now, I've been a CISO 3 times in 3 different very large organizations. And this is the challenge that CISOs and security people face every day on the operational end of things. There is no way that anybody can be coherent and educated about this much diversity of product. And this really is a challenge. This is the challenge that CISOs out in the operational world face every single day. So some of you may remember this. John Chambers said this at CES 2 years ago, actually 3 years ago now. You look back a decade from today at the impact of the Internet of Everything, I predict you'll see that it will be 5 to 10 times more impactful than the whole Internet has been. Now, if you can wrap your head around that, you're probably better than me. That is a profound statement. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know that we will be able to measure that. But if you think about the impact that the Internet has had on our lives, think about the ability to do some of the things that we can do today that we couldn't dream of 20 years ago. And if the Internet of Things is even, if it's 1 times more impactful than the Internet, that will be a huge thing. So, the Internet of Scary Things. I started talking about the Internet of Things and the Internet of Everything and the Internet of Industrial Things about 4 or 5 years ago, when we're just starting to have conversations about what is this all connected stuff. And quite frankly, it's surpassed even my own expectations as a technologist. And I'll have a couple more slides in a few minutes that will dig a little bit deeper into this. But some of you may have seen Bruce Schneier. He gave a testimony in Congress about, I think it was in November. I urge you to go pull down the transcript of it, because Bruce is always entertaining, but he was very entertaining to legislators who really don't understand technology at all. But this little statement here, it sounds quaint, but it's absolutely true. It might be that the Internet era of fun and games is over because the Internet is now dangerous. Actually, we could probably said that a decade ago, but it's getting more and more dangerous. So this is one of the things, again, as CEOs and leaders and executives and government officials, that when you're bombarded with this every day, you have to start wondering, what the heck are we doing? What response do we have to these kinds of headlines every single day that are coming at us and telling us this Internet of Things bow wave is on our way, but we really haven't solved the problem. In fact, we're just barely beginning to understand the problem. And so while the IoT is creating vast economies of scale, vast opportunities, there are a lot of things that we still don't know about it. I've been involved with standards for the past decade or so in a variety of different sectors. And one of the biggest problems that standard setting bodies have today is the fact that standards are intended to be relatively static. Technology is anything but static. So technology is constantly running past and running out in front of standards. So regulatory bodies are constantly behind the technology. And this is a huge problem, especially in certain industries like electricity. Sensor and connected devices are being deployed faster than they can be tested. Anybody that's a developer, I think you will realize that that's probably true. Buyers and users do not understand the risk. If something is cheaper, faster, and better, it is going in. You're deploying it without regard to what the risks that you may be buying for your company. And then privacy issues are not well understood. We're going to talk about privacy when we get into the questions and answers. So I used this slide last June, maybe it was July. This was a slide, I forget who put this, I just stole the slide, by the way. But I forget who put this in, but 100 gigabit DDoS events they were profound. I mean, it's like, how did we get to 100 gigabits? Back when I was the Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity at DHS, in August of 2012, you may remember that the financial industry in the United States came under attack by Iranians, and they were DOSing banks. And this happened every single day. And I remember getting a call from one of the 3 major ISPs on a Saturday night, and the CISO said, "Weatherford, what are you guys doing? We are about to tip over. We have 70 gigabit DDoS hitting us, and we cannot handle it." And so fast forward, last June, we had 100 gigabit DDoSes. And then many of you remember, in September, Brian Krebs got hit with a 602 gigabit DDoS. And then in October, this one, the 1.2 terabit. And this is the one that was, this was the DIN event, when the cameras from around the world were compromised and targeted DIN and took it offline with this 1.2 gigabit or terabit DDoS. So why is that a big deal? This is why it's a big deal. It wasn't just DIN that got taken offline. DIN had all of these customers, and all of these customers were the ones that are impacted by it. So this is the kind of thing that gets legislators' attention. And legislators want to legislate. Last year in the 114th Congress, which ended in December, there was a piece of legislation. It's called the Digit Act. I think it's Senate Bill, no, I don't have it in here. It was Senate Bill 1209, I think, and it said, we are creating legislation to regulate the Internet of Things. Now, think about that for a second. How is Congress going to regulate the Internet of Things? This is one of those things where legislators get in front of themselves and there are unintended consequences to laws that they write. So this is Weatherford's prediction. I've been modifying this every year for the last couple of years. We're very soon, we're already today, we're asking ourselves, why isn't this connected to the internet? And when you think about that, pretty soon it literally is going to be everything. So that ends my brief introduction to the internet the security of the Internet of Things. What I'd like to do now is have each of the panelists take 2 minutes, and I'm watching, 2 minutes, introduce themselves, introduce their company, and why they're here on the panel today. May, go ahead.
Sure. My name is May. I come from ZingBox. ZingBox is a startup founded more than 2 years ago in the Valley. The whole focus for ZingBox is to actually analyze IoT security and to provide solutions to protect connected devices. And after 2 years research, we actually found lots of insights about IoT security that I would be happy to share today with our fellow panelists. And actually, interesting thing is I just realized when I look at our founding engineering team, majority of the team comes from Stanford and MIT. So we're very honored to be here today at this MIT Stanford forum. And since last summer, we started deploy. Our solution is SaaS model, SaaS-based solution. So since last summer, we started to deploy our solutions. And within 6 months, we have dozens of customers, including some very large deployments and paid customers. And so not only we, after 2 years of hard work on R&D for IoT security, so not only we have some research results, engineering results, but we also see some real use cases and where the current status is in the real world on IoT security. And if we have chance, happy to share some of the findings and insights.
Well, thank you. Congratulations. Paying customers are always welcomed. Lasse?
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for having me on the panel today. My name is Lasse Andresen. I'm the founder and CTO for a software company called ForgeRock. We headquarters out of San Francisco. As you probably already have guessed, my accent is not from the Bay Area. So I'm born and raised in Norway, and but I got quite early introduced to this fantastic place on the planet. So I used to work for Sun Microsystems in many, many years. So rest in peace, fantastic company. So our company is a pure software company, and we are kind of like looking after three kind of like big areas when it comes to our software platform. It's identity, it's security, and it's privacy. Now, of course, we're going to talk a lot about security today and also privacy. I think the thing that kind of like when people start talking about identity, they normally associate that with users, which is kind of like a very narrow way of thinking about it. So if you think about identity is basically just a number of attributes that describe something. Kind of like for human being, it's kind of like your social security number and it's your mom and dad that are the producer. For a traffic controller or for a thing, maybe it's Siemens or GE, which is the producer of the device, and there's a serial number instead of a social security number. And the way all these things are identified, secured, on board, in the same way that we know how to do with humans, we have to do with things. So I think I'm going to hopefully talk a little bit about more of that later on today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. And maybe I'll just talk like this. That's better. My name is Mallik Tatipamula. It's my privilege to be on this panel session with our distinguished panel members, as well as, it's great to talk to you about this exciting topic because the next week I'll be in Barcelona. One of the key topics at Mobile World Congress is all about how do we secure these billions of devices, so-called IoT security. So it's a very timely session when Ravi Prasad asked me to be part of this panel session. So just a bit about myself. I'm in the industry for about 20 years, worked at Cisco, Juniper, Ericsson, now at FI. I have, co-authored 2 books and also over 100 publications and patents in the area of IoT, 5G, software-defined networking, and so on. So a bit about my company, FI Networks that I work for. We are, our DNA was in the application delivery space, where essentially we are layer 4 to layer 7 company. On one hand, we know the network side of it. On the other hand, we know the application awareness. So as an application delivery company, we started, but we expanded into application security. So we have a product portfolio between the endpoint security, network security, and application/cloud security. So that pretty much gives you an idea about FI product line. And obviously, IoT is the next big thing for us. So we are aggressively looking at it, and we have several solutions to be demonstrated next week in Barcelona. So our customer base spans across enterprise, service provider, and federal customers. So that pretty much gives you an idea why FI is here talking about this subject. Thank you.
Carl?
I'm Carl Ledbetter, and I'm the managing partner of Pelion Venture Partners, and I apologize for that. I just realized as I was listening to the introductions, I'd read them all, but seeing all the names and their titles in one place at one time makes me realize that I've kind of come home. It's nice to be with a panel, all of whom have a technical background. That's basically not the world I live in most of the time, although I love seeing the presentations from the entrepreneurs who do come out of that space. But I live in the financial world where people think an order of magnitude is a request for a large bottle of champagne. And they would have no idea what you're talking about if you tell them that a terabit per second is 10 to the 12th bits, and they just, like that. But I actually have an excuse for being in venture capital. I actually started as an academic. I have a Bachelor of Science, a Master of Arts, and a PhD in mathematics from Brandeis, a competitor of MIT in the Boston area. That's where I went to school. And I started as a professor, believe it or not, until I got fired for marrying my student, who I will have our 40th anniversary with this year. And I just want you to know I was a very young professor at Wellesley College. But I spent time as a professor at Wellesley College and at Clark University at Northwestern, and then I became academic dean in the California State University system, and spent some time working for Jerry Brown when he was the youngest governor of California back in the 80s. And I realized that neither academia nor government was what was going to fix things, and that I was very, very interested in the technical world, and started into the computer industry with IBM and then later Sun Microsystems, and became president of AT&T's consumer division when I really went to the dark side and went into venture capital 15 years ago. And Pelion Venture Partners is a just shy of $1 billion venture capital firm that invests exclusively in software and infrastructure. We love bits when they're moving and software is doing smart things with them. Do not ask me what the next Angry Birds or Facebook is. I do not know. If any of my children or now grandchildren know any of the companies I've invested in, I've made a terrible mistake. But if any of those companies that they know don't buy equipment and software from the companies that I invest in, then I have also made a terrible mistake. And I think that some of the things that Mark said to set this up are right on the mark. I think what we're seeing in the expansion of the internet into the Internet of Things is one of the most interesting things that we will see in not only in my career, which is going to be much shorter than most of you, but in your careers as well.
Well, let's just jump right in. As I said, I have some questions that we're going to go through, but we may diverge off depending on how the conversation flows here. So, Mallik, what do you see as disruptions in the industry that would impact IoT security solutions?
Yes. As we speak to customers, there are three major disruptions that we are seeing, right? So these disruptions are happening on the devices side, endpoint side. The devices are becoming smarter, smart homes, smartphones, smart metering, smart cards, and so on. Then the second type of disruption happening, the apps moving from on-prem to cloud. Then in the middle, the network that's connecting the devices to the cloud, which is moving towards software-defined networking. So one has to really look at end-to-end while looking at IoT security, because these three paradigm shifts, you can call it as, can really pose the weakest links for that matter. One has to really look at the endpoint security in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. And one has to look at the cloud identification, authorization, and also encryption. And also from network point of view, the classic firewall DDoS that you're talking about, DDoS attacks. So in reality, that's where I say that, from FI point of view, looking at holistic approach, end-to-end, securing these three weakest links, endpoint, cloud, the network in the middle.
Any other thoughts on disruption? Okay, May, let's talk about, since you're in the business and you work with customers, what are some of the challenges people have when they're actually implementing, operationalizing IoT security?
So we see for IoT security, not only there are technical challenges, but also there are lots of other challenges beyond technology. For example, we work a lot with large hospitals. And before, used to be the IT department is in charge of all the IT equipments, the servers, laptops, cell phones. But now more and more of the medical devices are getting connected online. And it used to be a group called Biomed team that they are in charge of these connected medical devices. And they have lots of medical knowledge, but they're not necessarily the experts in IT or in security. And then in the IoT world, not only you have the traditional IT equipments, you have the medical IoT devices, but you also have the security IoT devices or the traditional, the typical enterprise IoT devices. For example, the smart building devices, the connected HVAC system, the connected camera, surveillance camera. So then they are actually it's the facility team that in charge of these devices. So now the question is, who's responsible for all these connected devices? Now it's all connected to one or multiple networks. And then who's responsible for the security? So we see in lots of organizations, not just hospitals, now some of the advanced, the pioneering organizations who are leading the technologies, they're actually consolidating all the different departments and then have one person who's in charge of all these security issues, whether it's IT security or it's the operational security. In the hospital case, is the medical devices or is the physical security. So there are organizational challenges, and then there's also policy challenges. Say, again, using healthcare as an example, in the healthcare, we all know there are HIPAA compliance. There are good things and bad things. When you go to the hospital, you see there are lots of obsoleted devices or obsoleted security technologies, because lots of organizations are very afraid to touch these, whether it's X-ray machine or MRI machine, because every time they touch it, they have to go through this very lengthy, complicated HIPAA compliance. But on the other side, actually last year, because we see more and more issues on connected medical devices, and last year actually FDA came out a new guidance to tighten up the tighten up the security for connected medical devices. And after that, we actually see hospitals are more putting in more budget, paying more attention to medical devices. So there are organizational challenges, there are policy challenges, and then the last thing actually we consider is one of the most important things, but it's actually one of the key factors is the technology challenges. For the IoT, so many IoT devices and so many different kinds of IoT devices, how we scale it up and how we provide visibility, how we provide usability, because lots of the users for these IoT security solutions are not your traditional IT people, but people who can be staff, who can be nurses, who can be doctors, not necessarily this is their expertise. So how can you make your solution very usable to all kinds of users?
I think it's interesting you mentioned healthcare. I talked to a group of healthcare professionals last week in Los Angeles, and this is one of the greatest concerns they have now is so many of these medical devices, and you've read about many of them, come insecure out of the box, whether it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or whatever kind of connection it has. That security has not been embedded into these products. You may remember Stu McClure from Cylance. He actually hacked a medical device on stage at Black Hat 2 years ago. He hacked an insulin pump, was able to remotely manage an insulin pump and deliver the incorrect amount of insulin. And the same thing's been done with pacemakers and a variety of other devices. But healthcare is really one of the, and in fact, one of the comments that one of the people made at the event last week was that this, an iPad is the doctor's new stethoscope. I mean, it's as important to them as their stethoscope. And this is connected to all of those things you talked about, every device. And that should frighten everyone, by the way. Lasse, one of my favorite subjects is privacy. I said we would talk about it. So certainly as we're deploying IoT devices everywhere, willy-nilly, they're becoming completely ubiquitous. How is privacy being handled first? And is it adequate? Are we doing enough?
kind of coming from a company where my old boss used to say kind of like, get over it, there's no privacy. I think we should have not adopt that way of thinking.
He did say that. You're right.
So, but we're absolutely not doing that. And I see it's kind of scary how much people actually are willing to do for kind of like some convenience or a free T-shirt without actually knowing what they're doing. And I think we really need to protect kind of like some of these users and devices by having intelligence in the system itself. If you look on now on Europe with new GDPR acts coming in, which is pretty substantial in what they're doing, and this is going to be implemented before May 2018, is that the right for privacy at your information, and you're allowed to, first of all, knowing what information an organization has about you, the right to actually be forgotten is a very important principle. And this not only goes for humans, and also, of course, goes for devices. And all of these devices maybe have, think, for instance, a car. There's all sorts of data coming out of a car. Some of that data might kind of like belong to the car, how often it's been serviced and stuff like that. And you would like that data to follow along to the next owner, and the data belongs to the car and has not a big privacy issue. Maybe where a car has been to every certain amount of time could absolutely get some consequences if people are doing stupid thing in their private life. But you really need to implement the functionality to be able to control these kind of things. And I think one of the things that we need to do also is to see privacy is not only the bad thing, kind of like Big Brother is seeing you. It's all about trust. And if you as an organization can establish kind of like between yourself and your consumer, kind of like being transparent, showing kind of like your customer what kind of like data you have, you give them tools and to actually be able to take it away, revoke it, that can build an extreme powerful bounding between the company yourself, your brand, and your consumer. So it's not only that kind of like Big Brother is seeing you, it's also you can make a tremendous amount of business if you're handling your consumers in the right way and be transparent and handle privacy. So it's also a big positive potential monetizing things around it.
Yeah, I agree. That's a differentiator. It could elevate your brand above something else. But here's a public service announcement. He mentioned GDPR. If I want to ask who has or has not heard about or read about GDPR, but if you sell product in Europe, you're going to be responsible for complying with GDPR in 2018. And this is really, really going to be a big deal. So, Carl, I mentioned the Mariah attack against Den in October. And again, this was mostly low-cost devices, cameras. By the way, Stephen Hilt from Trend Micro did a talk at RSA last week, and he and one of his colleagues had scanned the internet with Shodan, and they found 170 million devices, public-facing devices, on the internet. Now, not all those devices were vulnerable, that had vulnerabilities, but that shows the magnitude, and that number is going to grow, by the way, a lot. So that shows the magnitude of the issue. But Carl, how do you abstract the security and identity challenges of low-power, low-cost devices to prevent these types of attacks that can really affect anything and everything on the network?
Well, I agree with everything we've heard here already this evening about the big problems on the Internet of Things. And I'd like to talk about the little problems. So even though the trillion bits a second Mariah attack sounds like a big problem, it's not a big problem in the sense that I mean it here. Here's what I'm talking about. We talk about in fact, Mark used the phrase earlier, the industrial Internet of Things, the I squared OT. And that's what most of us think about. And the reason for that is that it only makes sense to do so if you're in business, especially if you're in my kind of a business, an investing business. You're trying to invest in things that are worth a lot of money. If you're trying to protect a $1 million machine tool in a manufacturing facility, you can afford hundreds of dollars on a device of some kind to protect and secure that machine tool. And the same would be true of a gigantic container on a container ship. You can track wherever it is. It can send its position up and down. You can power it, spend $500 on it. Who cares? The container is worth millions of dollars. And the same would be true in a different sense for things that are in your body. If you're managing a pump for your diabetes, you want to make sure that thing is working right, and you don't want it to be hacked. You don't want it to be vulnerable. So this is, in fact, instead of calling it the industrial Internet of Things, we might call it the important Internet of Things, or the Internet of important things. I squared OT, right? I'd like to move the exponent, and I'm in one of the only audiences in the country where people actually know what I mean. You move the exponent from the I to the T. What I'd like you to focus your attention on is the Internet of tiny things. The tiny things started with these cameras in the Mirai attack. These cameras are out there. Who cares? I mean, they're little tiny cameras that are letting people look at their baby's crib at night for their monitor or something like that. Or maybe slightly more important than that, watching their front door, so that the 1 in 10,000 people who have somebody do something bad at their front door is going to get caught. That's not the issue. The issue is these things are getting smaller and smaller and cheaper and tinier and tinier. Mark said in one of his opening slides that we're going to have 1 billion of these things connected to the internet. And my only problem with that is I think he's off by about a factor of 10,000 or so in our lifetimes. I actually was participated in a major report study that was commissioned by the national laboratories called the Exascale Computing Report that was published in 2012 by a friend of mine, Jack Dongara, from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He headed that group, about the enormous problems that are associated with all things computing at the exascale. But I think I'm going to introduce people to a couple of new prefixes, because I have a talk that I give to engineering students called Nuts to Exabits. Because exa is too little. We're moving into the zone where we're going to need to worry about zetabits and yotabits, and there are even proposals for what prefix comes after that. These things are nuts. And let me tell you why that matters. When you have something that you take out of a box and it's considered unimportant or insignificant enough or small enough in some sense that you don't need to protect it very well, or you protect it with a password that starts out with the default password being password, you basically think that it's unimportant. And it is for itself. But when you have 1 billion or soon 1 trillion of those things that are out there living in the world that we live in the internet, and they can spew even a few bits a second, then you're going to have the potential for an attack that's many, many times larger than the 1 trillion bits a second that we saw back in October. And the problem that we have there is that it's not the protection of the things that we're putting out there and the data that they're communicating. It is, we need to be protected from them. It's the Internet of scary things. It's the Internet is going to become dangerous, and not just for the privacy reasons that we've already talked about, although I agree with all those. We need to have either a standards body, because if we don't have a standards body, we'll have regulators, because if we don't have regulators, we'll have congressional laws passed that regulate how we have to protect these things that can attach to the internet. And remember, some of these things are going to be so small, talk about nanotechnology kind of things, they may not even be powered. You can power passively really small, lightweight, small footprint devices by beaming a little electromagnetic radiation at them with, in a blast of some kind, and they can pop a few bits off, and you have 1 trillion of those, and pretty soon you get into big numbers. That's what happens. So we need to have a way to protect those devices from being a problem to the rest of us when they go rogue, either accidentally or on purpose. And the difficulty that we have here is that we are now in the realm where we feel comfortable and secure about the kind of security we have with the PKI infrastructure. One of the most important things that happened in the world back in the middle of the 70s is Ravis, Shavir, and Edelman, Diffie, and Hellman published their papers that kicked off the whole PKI infrastructure, and now we have elliptic curve additions to that as well. They solved an extraordinarily difficult problem, the problem of key distribution to make things secure. We used to have a different solution to that problem. Back in World War II, you took 2 silk handkerchiefs and you lettered the same one-time pad on them, and you left one at headquarters and you sewed the other one into the underwear of the guy you were dropping behind the lines in France. So the problem, there was a key distribution of a completely different sort. Here's what I'm going to say. We need to go retro. We need to go back to that kind of key distribution. Not for the whole key that we use for everything we use out on the internet. This is not a replacement for PKI. That's the way we're going to do it. But we need something better than a password that starts out as a default at password or 1234 to protect the identity of that thing before it gets connected to the internet. We need to have a symmetric key pair. And symmetric key pairs have the advantage, although they're harder to distribute. You have to manufacture them together and then get them connected once they go out into the world. We need to have a way of making that happen so that they can then download and work a RSA type or ECC type key pair exchange. But they need to be protected from the get-go. It should be illegal for them to be out there otherwise. We don't let people drive without insurance, and we shouldn't. We need to make sure that things that get manufactured, especially the tiny things, cannot be manufactured without some sort of an identity symmetric key pair that's small enough and light enough weight and low enough power and small enough in footprint and cheap enough to go on devices that cost not thousands or millions of dollars, but a few pennies each. That's what we need to do.
Boy, I tell you.
Oh, great.
You know, the thought that came to my mind when you started talking about encryption and how we need to have more robust and ubiquitous encryption was what we went through as a nation last year. And this is not a political statement by any means. But you remember the FBI had this little issue with Apple. And there have been a number of, by the way, that guy is still in office. He's still there. There are a number of people within the government that really are very concerned about ubiquitous encryption, what we're talking about here. And maybe this is a political statement. This is something we all need to worry about the government having too heavy of a hand there. That's all I'll say about that.
Just a comment.
Yeah, please.
I absolutely kind of like agree what Carl was saying here, and it was kind of funny because I was thinking some of the same thing this morning. Kind of like if you manufacture like an electricity, like something that plugs into your electricity voltage system, you basically need to have some kind of certification for actually even plug it in. Kind of like, but it kind of like connecting stuff to the internet, there's nothing. You can just throw stuff up there, which is kind of insane, like you say. And also back to the kind of like the whole password. Yeah, of course, it's even thinking that the password is enough is just ridiculous. And you need to establish kind of like trust at the first heartbeat when that device goes online.
Yeah, exactly.
And like talking about stuff like hardware root of trust and onboarding is from the first kind of like pulse is sending. That's why you need to capture it. You can't do it afterwards.
Yeah, this is the challenge. So Lasse, let's change a little bit here, change tack, and talk about edge computing. What role do you see for edge computing where analytics and knowledge generation occur at the source of the data in the IoT space?
I think there's going to happen a lot because it just has to happen because you can't kind of like even big data and IoT. Sometimes people go around and talk about little data. You have sensors and you put it all back to big data and happy days, and you run kind of like analytics and make actions out of it. It's absolutely not possible. If you look in the car industry, kind of like when you're getting vehicle-to-vehicle communications, are you kind of like hoping you have connection through Verizon in Silicon Valley? Like I can't even have a phone call going between San Francisco and Mountain View without losing it. So there absolutely have to be a lot of these decisions taking on the edge. And if you look on the million of, like in a car, it has like 100 million lines of software in the car. It's about 50 computers into it, kind of like. So the edge device is going to be extremely important. It will also protect probably stupid things that's sitting behind it. So not everything needs to kind of like going through this very kind of like cumbersome process of getting connected. And also you need to be able to filter data. You need to be able to make qualifications of data, and not all the data should actually go back to the cloud. So I see edge computing is absolutely a big thing in IoT, and we've just seen the start. And also it will kind of like change we have kind of like the PC area where the PC and server, kind of client server architecture, and everything was cloud. Now we're actually going back to a distributed computing model again, because it basically need to do it. You can't send everything back to the big guy in the cloud.
It's like skinny jeans, they're back in fashion.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yes. And Norwegians.
So Mallik, what are the fundamental attributes that we should take into account when designing scalable IoT security solutions, and how are they different from traditional security solutions?
So IoT introduces some interesting challenges, right? So I call it as 4 V's. The first V is all about volume. These Internet of Things, the devices, endpoints generate terabytes of data, petabytes of data. So that's in terms of volume. You're seeing massive amount of data being generated. The second V is all about velocity. The rate at which this data is being generated is phenomenal. The third V is variety. Tons of forms of data, in terms of structured, unstructured, real-time, stream, or even the diversity of the data sources. It's phenomenal in terms of variety.
Yeah.
The last V, the fourth V, is all about veracity, the data uncertainty due to inconsistencies in data or some sort of incompleteness or ambiguity of data. So for the first time, while designing the security solutions for IoT, unlike the traditional enterprise security solutions, one has to look into these 4 V's: volume, velocity, variety, and veracity. That really maps into very interesting technical challenges. So volume means it has to scale to meet the terabits, petabits of data, right? At the same time, given the devices that come in and go, you had to have that billions of concurrent connections set in per second due to explosion of these devices or things connected. So the concurrent connections matter while designing the next generation security solutions. At the same time, connections per second, the rate at which you set up and tear down connections, it has to be in billions of connections per second. And most importantly, latency and delay matters, because you have different latency and delay characteristics as you go from factory automation to autonomous cars to the smart metering. Different type of end applications have got different delay and latency characteristics. So from our point of view, looking at these 4 V's, mapping that into technical characteristics in terms of the scale, concurrent connections, connections per second, delay, latency, one has to look at these fundamental attributes, to really support this explosion of these devices.
Yep.
Make sense?
Yep. Thank you. So, May, we've talked about DDoS as one of the serious threats to IoT security. What are you seeing? What are some of the other threats that your customers, the people you're working with, are seeing around IoT security?
For IoT security, as actually everybody has already mentioned, the very first thing we see, the vulnerability actually comes from the manufacturers. There are lots of equipments, either they were not meant to be connected online, or when the manufacturers were doing the devices, generating the devices, because they're, say, for example, in medical devices, their expertise is mainly in medical devices. So they are short of resources, short of security expertise. So the new product coming out to the market also got rushed by time to market. They're trying to grab the market as fast as possible. So there are lots of IoT devices. We actually have a lab. We look into all kinds of IoT devices, and lots of them have lots of security issues. For example, the default password and the lots of, you will be amazed to see in the hospital, the majority of the traffic, network traffic, is not even encrypted. And there are X-ray machines like worth millions of dollars. They're using non-secured protocol to talk to its servers and to transfer data in clear text. So there are lots of issues coming out of the manufacturer. Then the second layer, we see the issues are the users, because we're getting into, as I mentioned before, we're getting into not just IT people, but also the operational people. And they not necessarily have the kind of expertise. So there are lots of like misplacement, misconfiguration, and that cause the vulnerability of the network. Then actually the third layer, only the third layer comes to the hacking incidents. And nowadays we already seen, so we all know the numbers. Okay, by 2020, the number of total number of IoT devices are going to be several times of the total traditional IT devices. But even nowadays, we already see in mid-sized to large-sized hospitals, the number of IoT devices has already exceeded the number of traditional IT equipments. Even though they're medical IoT devices and they're like enterprise IoT devices, and we're actually seeing increasing amount of medical, basically the operational IoT devices coming up, even though now we still see more general enterprise IoT devices more than the traditional medical IoT devices. So for right now, we see the hacking incidents going through these IoT devices. They're not quite targeted yet. For example, if we see hacking incidents, the hackers not necessarily know, okay, I'm hacking through an X-ray machine. So lots of hacking incidents now are more like opportunistic. So they first attempt are actually mainly on ransomware. So there are lots of ransomware attacks out there. They're trying to just blackmail the organization. And then they're using these IoT devices as a stepping stone to get into critical assets. For example, in healthcare situation, it will be the patient's healthcare record, which worth 20 times more in black market compared to our credit card record. So these IoT devices now, because before it used to be the healthcare record network is very separated from the IoT medical device network. But now, because everything is connected and the doctors and the patients can access their test results, their X-ray results, so all these networks start to get connected. So moving forward, we basically cannot assume we can always separate the networks. We can always do the segmentation. And also we cannot assume we can always separate, leave the bad guys outside of the door. We always have to assume, okay, within this room, we're going to have good guys and bad guys. So the question is, how do we distinguish bad guys from good guys? So coming back to the hacking situation, so we see lots of ransomware hacking. We see use IoT devices as stepping stone to get to critical assets, and also we see the hacking incident that affect physical security, because lots of these, as Mark mentioned before, lots of these IoT devices, they're not just a general purpose computing equipments. They're either at critical infrastructure or they can be life-threatening if they were hacked. So there are lots of physical security involved.
Yeah, that's a great point there. I call it network mythology, where we used to have an air gap between operational environments and IT environments, and that air gap doesn't exist any longer. I've done plenty of pen testing, and even in companies that swear they would bet their children's life on it, we can always get through that stuff. Carl, so we've talked about some of the different verticals of that IoT devices are being deployed in medical, industrial, manufacturing, energy, et cetera, et cetera. putting on your investor hat now, which of these verticals do you think are likely to invest the most in IoT security?
Well, that's a dirty question. I agree with the other panelists here that the I squared OT, the big things, the things that are valuable, are the places where initially at least the most money will be invested when you can recognize the vertical. Obviously medical devices, industrial machines, transportation, shipping, those kind of things. And automotive is a big one that's happening right now. Those are going to be very big and very important. And obviously when you're looking at big markets, you look at those kinds of things. But I have a sort of a contrarian point of view here for an investment thesis that will take a little longer to develop, but is one that is seeing a convergence from two different directions. And one of them is the Internet of Things. In this case, not the I squared OT, but the IoT squared, the Internet of Tiny Things. And artificial intelligence, neural networks, machine learning, that whole focus of things. The world produced in its entire history, from cavemen to the end of 2003, about 5 exabytes of data. We're now producing about 5 exabytes of data a day. Now, a lot of that is unstructured. There may be multiple copies of it. We don't know, though. There's just so much of it coming at us, and that number is growing so fast that we're going to need to get into that zettabyte and yottabyte era before the end of our careers. Well, what the hell do you do with all that data, and where, in fact, is it coming from? And what I'll tell you is that right now it's coming from all the devices that are already on the internet, but think about the days when we have 1 trillion of these devices instead of 1 billion of them, not too far from now. And artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to figure out a way to grab hold of that stuff, sometimes on the fly in real-time transactions where speed is of the essence, and power consumption is going to be a major consideration. So I think there is an industry that today doesn't really have a name, a vertical that doesn't really have a name. It's certainly going to come in security and in defense and in some of those sort of governmental agency kind of things, but it's also going to come in other areas where the industry has found enormous value in being able to target us individually by our behaviors and desires and uses. You already know that if you visited the BMW site while you were on Google to look for a new car, the next time you go to another web page someplace else, completely independent of that, you're going to see an advertisement for a BMW or a Mercedes. And that's not an accident, and we all know that. And mostly we tolerate it, mostly, because it's advantageous to us. But that's going to happen more and more at more sophisticated levels. So the targeting of individuals for marketing and advertising in any industry where it's valuable enough to do that are going to be one of the big things where you combine the Internet of Tiny Things that are monitoring practically everything we do practically all the time, together with the neural networks and artificial intelligence and machine learning applications that are going to make some use of that to tell somebody, Amazon, Google, Facebook, or the next competitor out there, that you're more likely to buy this than you are to buy this, and that they can move you up from a $19.95 purchase to a $24.95 purchase based on some behaviors that you're probably not even aware that you exhibit, but the devices that you have all around you, and that many of which aren't even secure, are going to know about.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, but before, there's the number up there to text. If you have any questions, after I ask this last question, then we'll start taking audience questions. So go ahead and text them up to there now. So this is a question for everybody. In a number of the IoT attacks, default passwords, as we've mentioned, had not been changed, but they'd been sniffed and then reset. So are there any fixes to this problem? And then what about the role of social engineering in IoT? Because I think there's some relationship there. Mallik?
I think I agree with Lasse. He mentioned, trust on first use, right? I think that's the right thing to do, whether it's through some sort of certificates or key exchange, or even as simple as open authentication mechanisms. Some way to make life complicated for hackers instead of just going with default. Or one step further, to really implement more stricter authentication schemes, maybe one can look into IEEE P16, 1316 for public cryptography or even encryption. Some strict reinforcement of some of these things, either go with certificate key exchanges as trust on first use, or go with some of the IEEE standards.
Yeah, I agree, and I think just want to add to that is kind of like the things are talking to applications, and very often also they are talking to users, and you need to have those things in the same security domain. If you're kind of like trying to go into silos and find a security solution for the things, and you don't kind of like count the other two parts, you basically have lost. You need to see the whole picture to be able to secure these things.
I think that's essentially handshaking. When you turn on the device for the first time, create handshaking between the device to the network or device to applications.
I think that's actually a good answer to it. I'm of the belief that the problem that we've seen recently, like the Mirai attack problem, where these devices are already out there that have practically no security when you turn them on, I think that ship has sailed. I don't think there's any real retrofit solution to that that's very practical or economically possible. But there is a long-term solution, and it's the one that you mentioned. It is, you got to have some kind of a handshake. Now, I think the right way to do that is the one that is the one-time pad kind of do a symmetric key exchange that's embedded in the thing, very small, very lightweight, very low power, and you use that not to do the entire apparatus of securing it, but to prevent it from being turned on and being live and active at the same time. Everything should have these keys on them. You use a very simple kind of zero-knowledge, proof of knowledge way of using a symmetric key exchange the very first time they're turned on, so they're safe. You use that to a handshake and establish a download for an actual key through the cloud. Now you have a full PKI infrastructure on everything, including things that cost 29 cents to manufacture.
I think for IoT, as everyone mentioned, the endpoint security is important, the onboarding is important, but at the same time, because there are going to be so many different kinds of IoT devices, it can be, and the devices can be very different from each other, from multi-million-dollar X-ray machine to a hospital bed sensor, which costs, $1 or several cents. It's very hard to have one solution that will fit all. And lots of IoT devices are going to have very limited capability to secure themselves, to do authentication or do encryption. So I think we're going to have to rely more and more on data analytics, on the behaviors we're modeling. And because of these IoT devices, now all of a sudden we can get huge amount of data that we could either was impossible for us to get before, or it was impossible for us to get at this near real time. So we should leverage all that data and use data analytics and machine learning, which we found would be a perfect tool for IoT security.
Okay, I have a whole bunch of questions, and we are not going to get through all these, but there's some really awesome questions in here. So I'm just going to toss these out, and anybody who feels crazy, go after it. Any comments on Amazon's new approach with low power chips running elliptic curve cryptography?
Well, yes.
I was guessing.
First of all, elliptic curves are apparently, except for a couple of small problems, apparently are going to be a better way to go about doing PKI than RSA. There's few small problems are people are afraid they have a backdoor inside the NSA. You've got to have a really good source of randomness to do it, which means you've got to have, I don't know, radioactive decay or some other source of good entropy to be able to make them work. But they're better. They're more secure for the same size key, and they are much lower power, and they're much faster. But even they are on the order of 10 to 20,000 times slower than symmetric key and more power than symmetric key exchange would be. So when Amazon decides they're going to put symmetric keys using zero knowledge, proof of knowledge, handshake connections prior to the elliptic curve security that they put on stuff, then you got to watch out. In some ways, Amazon will become the most dangerous company in the industry. Read that as also the most powerful company in the industry.
Wow. I'm gonna.
They're the boogeyman.
I'm gonna lose sleep
they're a
over
great
that
company.
question tonight. Okay, with billions of devices going online, are startups ruling this space, or will established companies be taking control? May? I know what you think or what you want.
Well, actually, before ZingBox, I was working at Cisco CTO office for 14 years, so I have experience in both big company and startup. I think actually IoT is providing excellent opportunity for startups because IoT is actually a very fragmented technology or a sector. It's very hard to have, as I mentioned before, it's very hard for you to develop one solution that will fit all. And we see tons of platform solutions, platform companies. But actually, on one side, we do need, for IoT, we do need at certain point, at certain layer, at certain vertical, we do need a platform. That's why lots of people need trying to solve the platform problem. But on the other side, even for very large companies, it's very hard to build a platform, not even mention for startups. And I was giving example that this, one of the largest consumer electronics companies in the world, and they were rolling out this platform because they already have lots of consumer electronic devices, and they say, okay, you know, we can have this platform that at your home, at your company, this is the only platform you need. I was like, that's great if that can happen. But when I asked him, so does it mean all your company's devices are already on this platform? And he was like, you know, we have a hard time to push it inside. That's why we're coming outside, hoping you guys are going to get onto this platform first, then we go back to our company. So I think platform is very challenging, but at the same time, I think for startup, there are lots of pain points we're seeing for IoT security and for IoT deployment because each vertical has its specific needs, and at each layer, it has specific requirements. I feel we're just talking about IPv6. I feel now IoT is more like IPv6 early days because all of a sudden, it's related to everybody, each school, each store, each hospital, each manufacturing floor is going to have this huge amount of IoT devices that they have no idea. If you talk to a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, how many IoT devices do you have in your organization? They have no idea.
No idea.
Needless to mention what kind of IoT devices. Needless to mention what's their security risk status. So there are just so many, and for these organizations, it's a school, it's a hospital. Their expertise are not supposed to be on managing these devices. So they need lots of help in terms of how you recognize these devices, how you identify these devices, how you manage these devices, how you secure these devices. And I see that actually lots and lots of opportunities for startup. And right now, so many players are trying to figure out where the pieces are. And I think this is just an excellent opportunity for startups.
What I would say, Mark, is that startups will win, big companies will buy them.
No doubt.
The R&D arm of big companies is no longer Bell Labs in Yorktown Heights. It's right here. It's the startups in Silicon Valley.
There are very, very few Bell Labs around these days.
There aren't any left, really.
Yeah, you're right.
And also maybe give you another data point for, you know, when we started the company more than 2 years ago, there wasn't any analyst data in terms of total addressable market. But we were very glad to see over the past 2 years, there are tons of data coming out. And the numbers, the total market for IoT security varies from like 29 billion to 40 billion by 2020. And what that number really means, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's 29 billion, 40 billion. What it really means is going to be a big market with at least double-digit growth for the next several years. And just give you a little bit perspective on what that number really means. For the firewall market, in 2015, the total market was 5 billion. And it's projected by 2020 is going to be 10 billion. But which means for IoT security, the total addressable market is going to be several times, at least several times more than firewall market. But if you look at today's firewall players, there are multiple unicorns. There are Palo Alto Networks valued at $15 billion. There's Fortinet valued at $7 to $8 billion. There's FireEye, and all these unicorns. vArmour, yeah. So that shows where the how big this opportunity is, and moving forward. Yeah.
I think there's huge opportunities for startup of like IoT by default, end-to-end security, kind of like is a lot of technologies, a lot of different skill set, and kind of like from people understanding the whole kind of like end-to-end thing. That's really hard to do, and kind of like startups tend to work together much easier than trying to get a big corporation, even if they have probably the skills somewhere within their 100,000 employees, setting it together to actually look at it holistically and make a solution. Something's really hard just to the size and the politics. So I think startups, combined startup ecosystems, have a huge opportunity here.
Can I
Great
give
question, by the
another-
way. Yeah,
Can I
please.
give another example to see why this is great opportunity for startup? Started last year. We started talking to customers, and lots of the sectors we're working on actually very traditional sectors, and their typical selling sales cycle is 18 to 24 months. And as I mentioned, now we're all talking about IT and OT convergence, operational technology. So not only you have to interact with IT people, traditional IT people, but also you have to talk a lot with operational people. And these people not necessarily have the IT or security experts. So last year when we started talking at the first meeting, talking to a particular customer, and the first thing they were telling us was, oh, we don't have budget. We're like, yeah, great. We just flew across the country to come here to chat and make friends. Okay. But
Nobody's ever done that, right?
yeah. But that particular customer, 83 days later, we closed the account. And again, this is in a sector, typical sales cycle, 18 to 24 months. And we thought, oh, maybe they just love us. And we like to think that way. But of course, nobody really wanted to talk about their security issues, the problems. But after we talked to more customers and, after several bottles of wines, we actually, there's one customer was telling us, oh, just tell you the truth. Last year alone, our organization had the attack attempts of 45,000 attacking attempts. That's just one organization. What that means is every single day, they receive more than 100 attempts. And also when we talk to organizations, the very first pain point they're having is, we don't know how many devices are connected to our network. And we start to realize, oh, we have this thousands of tens of thousands of devices are connected. We have no idea. So we start looking into that problem. We don't see any solution. And the tool we're using right now is something called Excel. So that's why we could close this account within 83 days. Of course, I think they love us, we love them. But the key thing is because of the whole IoT momentum, all of a sudden they start to see lots of problems that they don't have any solutions, they don't have any tools. That's where I see startups have great momentum and opportunities.
And I quite frankly, I think we haven't even scratched the surface. That momentum it's just a little ripple on the sea right now.
Exactly. When you look at IoT, different layers of IoT, you look at the cloud, you look at the protocols, the infrastructure, you look at the application, and you look at the very bottom connectivity. We're still at the very beginning of the beginning. There's still lots of things to be done, which means lots of opportunities.
Mallik?
I think I tend to agree with what Carl and May said. This innovation continues, right? If you really look at the number of connected devices, so-called Internet of Things, over wireless, it's going to grow. The wireless can be 4G LTE, or Wi-Fi. Now the discussion is around 5G. Verizon announced that they are going to enable 5G. In fact, offer 5G services in 10 cities. And Korean Telecom, NTT Docomo already started 5G pilots for connected car or some sort of Internet of Things use cases. So with what Lasse said, the edge computing, right? So there's a discussion about mobile edge computing. How do you distribute the intelligence closer to the device or Internet of Things? How can you scale that? So the idea is to implement that mobile edge computing onto 5G base stations to make it more intelligent so that you can stop any attacks right at the entry point coming from vulnerable devices. So you can see so much innovation happening coupled with the 5G, and then there's a lot of automation analytics happening, right? So that's what we are going to discuss next week in Barcelona, that how this IoT innovation will, gain the momentum with 5G introduction.
Thank you. This is a statement, not a question. It says, all this trust and symmetric key issues makes me afraid of Big Brother. Yes. There are so many great questions here. I wish we could get to them. Okay. This is a technical question. I don't know if anybody can answer this, but how do you secure lower power devices when TLS is a very expensive protocol? TLS session negotiation is expensive and TLS certifications are large.
Well, you start with something that isn't power hungry. And you can make encryption as strong as you like with a small, lightweight, small footprint, low cost symmetric key. And then when you need to, you can go to the cloud, do the key exchange for a PKI, a full PKI infrastructure, and do what you need to do. But there's really no way around the power requirements of the two best known methodologies to do public key encryption, the RSA algorithm or elliptic curve methodologies. We've got to find a cheaper, lighter, faster way of doing things when you get down to these things that are so small, so inexpensive, and so low power. We're going to have, my guess is that we're going to have more things out there that have essentially no power, things that are passively powered, than we do have all of the big things in the world that are connected to the internet within 15 or 20 years.
Okay. This is a question that's been around, but takes a different shape with IoT. Don't the ISPs have some role in providing some defenses and a more resilient internet?
Yeah, actually, when we started the company more than 2 years ago, we were looking at whether we want to do consumer or want to do enterprise IoT security. And then eventually we decided to do enterprise because we didn't see the consumer market was ready yet. And actually we're glad that we did that. But having that said, for the last a year or so, especially for the last 6 months, we started to see ISPs getting interested in moving into IoT security. And we got approached by several ISPs, we got approached by several home router manufacturers talking about how, because when you are talking about consumer, it's mainly going to be the ISP's role to protect your home. And we actually envision your home eventually going to be like a small enterprise with the number of connected devices you're going to have. But the issue is you're not going to have an IT department. So it's going to be mainly probably the ISP's responsibility to provide the security as a service to protect all your connected devices. And we're glad to see that several larger ISPs start moving into that direction.
This took them long enough, though.
Yes.
In fact, there are a few customers that we are working with, without naming them. They've already implemented some of the security solutions for smart home, connected car sort of use cases. So it's just last year in 2016, it started happening, providing such kind of security services to the mostly so-called digital home scenarios.
Okay. It's an interesting one. Given the current geopolitical climate with Russia hacking issues and confidence in the government and corporations being low, how will IoT businesses address jangled nerves of a cynical, wary public concerned about personal freedoms? That is, I didn't make that up. Somebody actually did it.
Well, it's good that somebody is asking that question. We
Yeah.
should all be worried about that, and we should all talk about it, even in parties where the people in the room aren't very technical, because it's really hard to describe what this problem is, how big it is, and how hard it is to solve. But it's also important to tell them that there actually is a solution. It's a complicated one that they're not necessarily going to understand the mathematics of. But modulo the NSA having secretly cracked, the algorithm for factoring large composite numbers or something like that, this is as good as it's going to get. The kinds of things that we're talking about here are as good as it's going to get, short of having a complete one-time pad that you can provision remotely. There is no way around this. We've got to be on top of this. The personal freedoms issue is one of the very large problems we're going to have to deal with, and the other one is not just the personal freedoms, but the security against pretty severe attacks. We've seen these attacks like the trillion bit per second distributed denial of service attacks, and that is peanuts compared to what somebody could do if they get into some of our big infrastructure systems in the United States or elsewhere in the world.
So, Lasse, to go back to one of the things you talked about earlier related to privacy, please speak to the ethical considerations and unique security issues with IoT and talking tech toys. Talking tech toys, like.
Oh yeah, yeah. There was it last week or something? There was an incident with the toys. Yeah, honestly, I think that there needs to be, as Carl said, there needs to be some kind of regulations to these kind of stuff, like just connecting toys, whatever, and then just connecting it up, and no certification, no kind of like protection between people that actually don't know what they're doing, and somehow it needs to be regulated. There's no way you can start teaching your kids that don't talk to the doll because somebody's maybe listening. If you know what I mean. We need to solve this in a very different
There
way.
was a court case a few years ago. It doesn't sound related at first glance, but it is, where the court basically ruled that if your curtains are open, the police can sit across the street and look into your house with a telescope. They're not allowed to look into your house with an infrared camera if your curtains are closed because of the expectation of privacy principle in the law. We have this problem all over the place. I think what you were referring to, Lasse, is that there's a court case right now where the prosecutors have subpoenaed Apple about getting voice recording from Siri, the 40-second loop, that might have contained information about what happened in the room during the time when a murder occurred. Now, those are extreme cases on this, but I've heard it said that you can't go anywhere in London anymore without being on camera. Are we pretty close to the time when you can't go anywhere in the world anymore without having somebody listening to you as well? I think there are serious ethical issues here. Yeah. And when these devices get smaller and lighter, if you've seen the movie Eye in the Sky, we don't really quite have those yet, I don't think. But we're getting pretty close to the fact when these little nano devices that have low power and ability to listen or look or watch or record data of some kind from you are going to be so ubiquitous that we may not have any understanding or knowledge about whether we in fact are being watched. So what is our expectation of privacy in times like that? What are the legal principles that we're going to have to adopt when we don't even know whether we're private? I think these are very severe problems, and if technologists don't come forward to be part of the process of solving these things and getting some grip on it, then we're going to have it inflicted upon us by law and regulation. Yeah. And I don't think that's a good thing, because the people who are doing the laws and regulation, basically, here's a dirty little secret for you. They don't know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, I think privacy is always a very hot topic at any security panel. And I like to provide a little bit different viewpoint. It's because we work on enterprise security, so I'm mainly talking about enterprise privacy. And actually, more than 2 years ago when we started the company, when we talked to all kinds of customers, we actually ran into lots of concerns. People were like, oh, because we're a cloud-based solution, people are like, there's no way I'm sending any of my data into your cloud. And you have to provide an on-premise solution. Without an on-premise solution, I'm not even going to talk to you. But now, 2 years later, almost, I would say, majority of our customers are all using our cloud. And because, well, first of all, we guarantee we don't send any sensitive information into our cloud. And actually, we are doing lots of edge computation and processing. We process the data, and we only send something processed data we call metadata, which is only 0.1% of the overall data, and it's not the raw data. So that helps a lot. But also on the other side, we see people's, when they see the benefits of, say, for example, if they use our cloud, not only I can see the 3 X-ray machines in your hospital, but I can also see hundreds of other X-ray machines' behavior and can tell you what's the normal behavior, give you the statistics. And they actually benefit a lot. What if in case from day one, all these 3 machines are hacked? They are all behaving abnormally. But by using our public cloud, we can actually give you that information statistic. And actually one of the
Anonymized.
Yes, only the statistics tell you the model of the normal behavior. So they do see the benefit, and as the public cloud is getting more and more secure, they see the risk is lower, but the benefit is higher. And actually, one of the Fortune 50 companies we talked to, they have tons of very sensitive data. And last year, they had 20% of the data on public cloud, but this year, they plan to move their 70% of their data onto public cloud. And that's actually a very common trend we're seeing among our customers and the companies we talk to.
Have another conversation with you about that later.
Okay.
So we have just a couple minutes left. I'd like to just ask for closing comments. 60 seconds. You can see the clock up there. 60 seconds for each. So May, do you want to start?
Sure. I think there are lots of opportunities, lots of challenges for IoT security. And moving forward, we think it's be harder to do endpoint security, even though that's still very much needed. It's hard to scale up. It's hard to do on each end device. We think analytics, machine learning is the way to go. And there are lots of challenges, not on protecting these connected devices, but also first how to visualize, how to identify these devices, how to see these devices, how to manage these devices. Only after you know about these devices, then you can protect these devices.
Thanks. Lasse?
I think there's a big thing to do actually on the skills side, because again, back to the end-to-end security, it is so much different domains that you are touching, from kind of like from people doing web application, mobile applications, people doing kind of like hardware security or crypto libraries and stuff. And to these companies kind of tend to live in small silos, and nobody is actually connecting the dots. So there's a lot of technologies out there. There's a lot of kind of like really good skills. We need to break up the silos and look at this kind of like from end to end and get a lot of these guys into the same room. I think when we start first looking on IoT security, kind of like we said, oh, who should we start working with? You saw the slide in the beginning there on all the logos, where we said if we're gonna do an end-to-end security, kind of like you need to. In one end, you need to go as low as possible, and that's probably the chip. And we said, okay, let's start talking to Intel. Let's start talking to ARM, see what they're doing. And it took kind of like 6 months before we understood what we were talking about. Like they are silicon guys, and they have that kind of like their own security domain. And we came from the web and mobile world. But after 6 months, it actually starting to get stuff together. So it's a lot about skills and combining and breaking down some of these silos.
Mallik?
I think I agree with Lasse. Looking at IoT security means you have to look end-to-end approach. So from FI point of view, we call it as multi-layer dynamic security. Multi-layer in the context defined as device, network, and cloud/applications. So one has to really look at implementing end-to-end security between these 3 layers. I think that's key to, breaking the silos that Lasse was talking about, and how you apply this in the context of wireless access. That's yet another thing. Then, in addition, how does automation analytics play a role in the context of this big picture, end-to-end security? I think this is the essence of our approach looking at IoT security from a FI perspective.
I would just say, hang on to your hats. We're in for a hell of a ride. There is tremendous intellectual excitement that's on the horizon for us all here, especially in the convergence of the Internet of Things and machine learning and neural networks and artificial intelligence. There's tremendous opportunity for financial gain in terms of building companies. There is tremendous opportunity to help the world, all parts of the world, by extending to all 7.5 billion people here the advantages of being connected to all of the information and resources. But pay attention, because there is tremendous danger here, both from the loss of privacy and from sort of the attacks that can be mounted by people who are sophisticated about how to exploit these things if we're not careful about the way we roll it out.
Well, thank you all for coming. I think, one thing that's pretty obvious, as Carl just said, there are plenty of challenges, technical challenges, there's political challenges, there's cultural challenges, but that means opportunity. I really do believe that we are just barely scratching the surface. 5 years from now, you guys will say, we were there at the beginning. And seriously, I think there's just such tremendous opportunity for startups to get out there and actually be part of the beginning of something. So thank you all very much. You're gonna...
Good.